Well, I did it again. I can't seem to pass up a good deal on a cheap old Liebherr material handler. This one is a 922, which is the same model that we're actually using as a primary machine over at the other yard. But I'm pretty much already regretting buying it, and you're about to find out why. This turned into a pretty big project, but when I bought it, it should have been a relatively quick project to get it up to speed and use it as a spare material handler. That's still the plan. We're gonna finish fixing this machine up as we get time and probably rebuild the grapple to put on it, and also have the magnet system so we can use it as a grapple or a magnet machine. But we'll talk more about that later, and I will give some updates probably in the coming weeks or coming months as we actually get time to finish this machine. But let me show you where we started and the entire process to get the machine to where it's at now. All right guys, as you can see, we got the magnet taken off and sitting on the trailer, and now I'm going to get up in the cab and pull the cab bolts out, and then he's going to help me lift it off with one of their other machines. But the machine fired right up. It had a loose battery terminal when I got here. We got that tightened down and it fired right up and seems to work okay. So no pretty much exactly what I expected, and the crane's in pretty good shape. Camera had died and it was pouring down rain, and I wasn't thinking about the camera. All I was thinking about was getting the machine off the trailer. So unfortunately I didn't get any footage of that, but that is what we ended up having to do. Unfortunately, the machine was supposed to be delivered the day before and the weather was completely clear, but the transport company got pulled over for a full DOT inspection and he ran out of drive time and daylight, so he ended up having to sit overnight, and it unfortunately started to rain. I should have made sure that they knew the cab area needed to be tarped, especially if it was going to rain, but unfortunately that sort of fell through the cracks and we are where we are. Over the weekend, I pulled the display panel out of this machine and put it in a bag of rice in hopes that it would dry out enough to still work, but the control panel is a lot more difficult to access and remove, so we basically just have to hope that it's completely dry and still functioning. We have had these issues in the past with some of our other machines, and we end up having to rewire a lot of the machine to get the functions back. I'm hoping this one dried out enough and that we didn't cause any further damage by trying to run it. We did disconnect power once we realized that we weren't going to be able to get the machine moving, so hopefully there's no long-term damage, but let's put it back together and find out. So I'm sitting up in the cab of the machine, and this is the display panel that I removed and had in the bag of rice. I've gone ahead and reconnected all the wires, so we're good here, but some of the wiring from the display panel to the control board is still disconnected, so I need to get over there, reconnect that, and then we should be good to reconnect the batteries and give it a try. So the control board is a little more difficult to access. It's behind this panel next to the seat on the side of the cab. So I'm going to go ahead and get this removed, and then you can see that big connector right there is what we disconnected, and we need to get it reconnected. Under further inspection, I'm afraid that we're going to have a little bit of issue with this wiring and connector. You can see that one spot that looks burnt and a little bit corroded. I'm going to get with Alex and see if that is going to cause an issue and we need to replace that entire wire, or if we're good to go ahead and try it. Other than that, it didn't really blow any of the fuses. We kept trying to keep this panel as dry as possible. We were using some compressed air and trash bags to try to cover it, but unfortunately it did still end up getting pretty much completely soaked. Well, we decided to go ahead and hook the wire back up and just see what happens. If we have any sort of issue, that could definitely be our culprit with those couple burnt wires, but we want to see what happens either way. The last thing I need to do before we try to run the machine is reconnect the hydraulic line for the brakes. You can see where we added a line with that new fitting to manually override them, basically so we could put pressure to the brake pack and release the brake. So I'm going to disconnect that one and put the normal line back on, and then we should be good to go. Well, we've got everything hooked back up. Let's see what happens. Well, unfortunately, once it was back together, we still didn't get any of our functions back. The lights on the display won't change when you press the buttons. So, unfortunately, all we can do is try to bypass and rewire some of it. After about 8 hours of working on rewiring the machine, we finally have all the functions working, and I'm gonna test it for a couple minutes, and then I'm gonna move it to the other side of the yard so we can continue to work on it. We have discovered a couple other slight issues with it since we've been testing it and running it. It's got one leaking stick cylinder, so we're gonna have to pull that down and repack it, and a couple other pins and bushings and things are gonna need to be replaced. But I'm very happy that we have got it working and driving, and the outriggers and everything are working like they should. So I'm gonna jump in it and test it for a few minutes, and then I'm gonna take off back there. Once we kind of get the wiring finished squared away, I'm gonna put the cab back on it, and then we'll move on to working on the other things. Well guys, that's pretty much going to be it for this one. We just wanted to get the cab put back on this machine. That way we didn't have to worry about the weather anymore. But now that this machine is going to be in the dry, we're just going to let it sit for a couple weeks, potentially even a couple months before we even start working on it again. You can probably tell by the mess back here that we've got tons of projects going on, and unfortunately this one's just going to fall towards the bottom of that list at the moment. Once we get back to working on this machine, we'll rebuild the grapple that came with it, double check that the magnet system works, all of that good stuff, and then we will give this machine a final once over before we put it into service. It is a bummer how things sort of panned out. We had to end up rewiring most of this machine, which unfortunately is all too common with these old Liebherrs. All the ones that we have that are from the 90s, we've pretty much had to do some sort of rewiring work because the displays end up quit working and you can't control some of the functions without the display buttons, so we basically override that and bypass it. Anyways, I'll give you guys an update as this machine progresses. If it progresses to anything further, I do plan to make a full video of rebuilding that grapple that came with it, because that grapple to me is just awesome. It looks like an excavator 3/2 grapple, but it's set up for a material handler. That's the first one I've ever seen like that. So I plan to make a rebuild video just for the grapple itself, and then when we get it put on the machine, I'll show it in action. But like I said, that'll be a while, but when we get to it, I'll let you guys know. As always, thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you on the next one.